Royal Guard Horses Get Revenge. Part 1. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists began gathering for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd, a group of university students from America had arrived early, their cameras ready and their attitudes less than respectful. They had spent the previous night watching YouTube videos of people bothering the Queen's Guard, laughing at compilations of tourists getting too close to the stoic soldiers and their magnificent horses. Marcus Thompson, a 22-year-old business major from Texas, led the group with his oversized personality and even bigger mouth. He had made a bet with his friends back home that he could get one of the famous guards to break character, and he was determined to collect his winnings. His girlfriend Sarah rolled her eyes at his antics, but she secretly enjoyed the attention. His boldness brought them. The royal horses stood at their posts like living statues, their glossy coats reflecting the morning light. These weren't ordinary horses. They were specially trained Irish draft horses in Cleveland Bays, each one carefully selected for their temperament, intelligence, and impressive size. Wellington, a massive black gelding with white markings, on his face had served the Royal Guard for 8 years. His partner, a beautiful bay mare named Victoria, had been protecting the royal grounds for 6 years. Both horses had seen thousands of tourists, dealt with countless flashes from cameras, and maintained their composure through every situation imaginable. But today would be different. Marcus approached Wellington first, his phone already recording, as he got closer than the clearly marked boundaries allowed. The horse's ears flicked forward, a sign that experienced handlers would recognize as attention and mild irritation. Marcus, however, interpreted this as encouragement. "Look at this, big boy," Marcus said loudly to his camera, completely ignoring the stern warning signs posted around the area. "I bet he's never seen a real cowboy before." His friends laughed as he affected an exaggerated Texas accent, making clicking sounds with his tongue as if calling a farm animal. The guard mounted on Wellington remained perfectly still, his red tunic pristine and his expression hidden beneath the iconic bearskin hat. However, those who knew horses would have noticed the slight tension in Wellington's muscles, the way his dark eyes tracked Marcus's movements with increasing focus. Sarah joined her boyfriend, pulling out her own phone to capture what she hoped would become viral social media content. She had over 50,000 followers on Instagram and was always looking for unique content to boost her engagement rates. The royal horses seemed like the perfect backdrop for her European adventure series. "Babe, get closer," she urged Marcus, positioning herself for the best angle. "My followers are going to love this. Touch his nose or something." Marcus needed no encouragement. He stepped even closer to Wellington, reaching out his hand toward the horse's muzzle despite the clear regulations against touching the animals. Wellington's nostrils flared as he caught the scent of the approaching tourist, a mixture of cheap cologne, breakfast bacon, and nervous sweat. The horse had dealt with countless tourists over the years, but something about this particular human's energy felt different. There was a lack of respect, an aggressive entitlement that Wellington's keen senses picked up immediately. Horses are incredibly perceptive animals, capable of reading human emotions and intentions with remarkable accuracy. Wellington sensed that this wasn't innocent curiosity or even typical tourist ignorance. This was deliberate provocation. As Marcus's hand approached his face, Wellington made a decision. With lightning-fast reflexes that surprised everyone, watching, the massive horse jerked his head to the side and clamped his teeth down on the sleeve of Marcus's expensive designer jacket. The fabric tore with a satisfying rip as Wellington pulled back, leaving Marcus stumbling backward with his mouth hanging open in shock. "Did that horse just bite me?" Marcus exclaimed, looking down at his ruined jacket sleeve. The crowd around them had grown larger, with many tourists now pointing their cameras at the unfolding drama instead of the traditional ceremony. Sarah rushed to her boyfriend's side, still filming but now with a mixture of concern and excitement. This was definitely going to get views, even if it wasn't quite the content she had planned. "Are you okay? Did it hurt you?" Marcus examined his arm and found no injury, just shredded fabric and wounded pride. His face reddened as he realized that dozens of people had witnessed his embarrassment, and many were still recording. This wasn't going according to his plan at all. "That stupid horse needs better training," he muttered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Where I come from, we know how to handle animals properly." Wellington's ears pinned back against his head, a clear warning sign that Marcus completely missed in his embarrassment and growing anger. The horse's intelligence was evident in his dark eyes, which seemed to assess the situation with an almost human-like understanding of the disrespect he was witnessing. Victoria, the bay mare stationed nearby, had been watching the entire interaction with growing interest. Horses are social animals with strong bonds, and she had developed a close relationship with Wellington over their years of service together. She could sense her partner's irritation and shared his assessment of these particular tourists. The mounted guard on Wellington remained motionless, but those paying close attention might have noticed the slightest relaxation in his posture, a subtle signal that he wasn't entirely displeased with his horse's reaction to the disrespectful tourist. Marcus, his pride stung and his expensive jacket ruined, wasn't ready to give up on his original plan. If anything, the horse's reaction had only made him more determined to prove his dominance. He had grown up around horses on his family's ranch in Texas, and he wasn't about to be shown up by some fancy English horse in front of all these people. "Let me try again," he told Sarah, adjusting his torn jacket and moving back toward Wellington. "I'll show this horse who's boss." The crowd watched with a mixture of anticipation and concern as Marcus prepared for his second approach. Tourist. Guides in the area began moving closer, sensing that the situation might escalate beyond the usual tourist mishaps they were accustomed to managing. Wellington stood perfectly still, but every muscle in his powerful body was now coiled with attention. His years of training had taught him patience and restraint, but his natural horse instincts were telling him that this human posed a continued threat to his dignity and space. The stage was set for what would become one of the most memorable confrontations between tourist and royal horse ever captured on camera, and neither Marcus nor Wellington was backing down. Royal Guard horses get revenge. Part 2. Marcus straightened his torn jacket and cracked his knuckles like a boxer preparing for a fight. The growing crowd of tourists sensed drama unfolding and formed a loose circle around the scene, phones and cameras at the ready. What had started as a typical morning at Buckingham Palace was turning into an unexpected entertainment show. "Watch and learn," Marcus announced to his friends, his Texas drawl becoming more pronounced as his confidence returned. He had convinced himself that the horse's previous reaction was just luck, and now he was determined to show everyone, especially the dozens of people recording, that he could handle any animal. Sarah bit her lip nervously as she continued filming, part of her hoping Marcus would just walk away, but the larger part excited by the potential viral content they were creating. Her Instagram stories were already getting hundreds of views as people shared the videos in real time. Wellington watched Marcus approach for the second time, and something shifted in the massive horse's demeanor. His ears remained pinned back, and his dark eyes tracked every movement with laser focus. 8 years of serving as a Royal Guard horse had given Wellington an almost supernatural ability to read human intentions, and he could sense that this wasn't over. This time, Marcus tried a different approach. Instead of reaching for Wellington's face, he moved toward the horse's side, attempting to pat his neck like he had done with horses back home on the ranch. But Wellington wasn't a ranch horse, and this wasn't Texas. This was a highly trained military horse who understood boundaries, respect, and the importance of maintaining order. As Marcus's hand made contact with his neck, Wellington's response was swift and calculated. The horse sidestepped with surprising grace for such a large animal, causing Marcus to lose his balance and stumble forward. But Wellington wasn't finished. With perfect timing, he swung his massive head around and nudged Marcus firmly in the chest with his muzzle, not hard enough to cause injury, but with sufficient force to send the young man staggering backward into the crowd of tourists. Marcus windmilled his arms as he tried to regain his balance, his face flushing red with embarrassment as laughter erupted from the watching crowd. He bumped into an elderly British woman who tutted disapprovingly and shook her head at the typical American behavior. "That horse is defective," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking slightly with frustration. "Someone needs to report this." But the crowd's sympathy wasn't with Marcus. Murmurs of "serves him right" and "should have listened to the signs" rippled through the gathered tourists. Many of them were experienced travelers who understood the importance of respecting local customs and regulations, especially at such a prestigious location. Wellington returned to his position with dignity, his posture perfect and his expression almost smug if horses could be said to smug. His mounted guard remained statue still, but there was an almost imperceptible relaxation in his shoulders that suggested approval of his horse's behavior. Victoria, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, decided it was time to contribute to the lesson. As Marcus dusted himself off and looked around for support from the crowd, he made the mistake of turning his attention to the beautiful bay mare. Surely, he thought, this smaller, gentler-looking horse would be easier to handle. Maybe. "This one has better manners," Marcus muttered, approaching Victoria with renewed determination. His friends tried to call him back, finally recognizing that he was fighting a losing battle. But Marcus was too invested in saving face to listen to reason. Victoria's reputation among the palace staff was well established. While Wellington was known for his strength and imposing presence, Victoria was famous for her intelligence and her ability to execute precise, almost surgical responses to problematic situations. The stable hands often joked that she could have been a chess player if she had been human. Marcus reached out toward Victoria's reins, apparently planning to hold them while posing for a photo. This was not only against regulations but also potentially dangerous, as it could interfere with the guard's control of his mount. Victoria's response was a masterpiece of equine psychology. Instead of jerking away or biting like Wellington had done, Victoria stood perfectly still until Marcus was in position for his photo. Sarah raised her phone, ready to capture what she hoped would finally be the triumphant image they had been seeking. Marcus smiled broadly, believing he had finally found a cooperative horse. Then Victoria struck. With the precision of a Swiss watch, Victoria lifted her right front hoof and brought it down firmly on Marcus's designer sneaker. Not with enough force to break bones, but with the considerable weight of a half-ton animal behind it. Marcus's smile instantly transformed into a grimace of pain as he hopped on one foot, trying to pull his trapped shoe free from beneath Victoria's hoof. The mare held her position for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for every camera in the area to capture Marcus's predicament, but not long enough to cause serious injury. When she finally lifted her hoof, Marcus stumbled backward, his expensive sneaker now bearing a perfect horseshoe-shaped impression. "My foot," Marcus yelped, hopping around like a character in a cartoon. "That horse stepped on my foot." The crowd was now openly laughing, with several people applauding Victoria's perfectly timed response. A group of British schoolchildren on a field trip began chanting, "Horse 1, Tourist 0, which quickly spread through the crowd. Sarah lowered her phone, torn between concern for her boyfriend and amazement at the footage she had just captured. This was definitely going viral, though probably not in the way they had originally intended. A palace security guard finally approached the scene, his expression stern but professional. He had been watching the situation develop from a distance, waiting to see if the horses would handle the problem themselves, which they clearly had. "Sir," the guard addressed Marcus in a polite but firm tone, "I'm going to need you to move away from the horses and respect the designated boundaries. These are working military animals, not petting zoo attractions." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to demand that something be done about the aggressive horses, but the pain in his foot and the amused stares of the crowd had finally deflated his ego. He limped away from the horses, his torn jacket hanging awkwardly and his expensive sneaker now decorated with a permanent reminder of his encounter with Victoria. Wellington and Victoria resumed their positions as if nothing had happened, their training and professionalism evident in every line of their posture. But those who knew horses could see the satisfaction in their eyes and the alert confidence in their bearing. They had handled the situation with precision, dignity, and just enough force to make their point without causing real harm. The crowd began to disperse. Many people sharing videos and photos on their social media accounts with captions celebrating the horse's perfect responses to the disrespectful tourist. Marcus and his friends retreated to a nearby cafe to tend to his wounded pride and aching foot, unaware that their morning encounter was about to make them famous in ways they never intended. But the horse's revenge was far from over. Wellington and Victoria had tasted victory, and they were about to discover that their morning's work had attracted the attention of someone who would give them an opportunity to truly settle the score. Royal Guard horses get revenge. Part 3 news of the morning's incident spread through the palace grounds faster than Marcus could limp to the nearest cafe. Palace staff members who had witnessed the encounter were already sharing the story with their colleagues, and the security footage was making its way up the chain of command. What impressed everyone most was how Wellington and Victoria had handled the situation with such precision and restraint. Exactly the kind of behavior that made them exemplary Royal Guard horses. Detective Inspector James Morrison of the Metropolitan Police, who was responsible for palace security, reviewed the footage with a mixture of professional interest and barely suppressed amusement. A 20-year veteran of law enforcement, Morrison had seen every type of tourist behavior imaginable, but he was particularly impressed by the horse's measured responses. "Look at that," he murmured to his colleague, replaying the video of Victoria's perfectly timed foot placement. "That mare's got better timing than most of our officers." But Morrison's attention was caught by something else in the footage. As the camera panned across the crowd during the incident, he spotted a familiar face, one that made his expression grow serious immediately. Among the tourists filming the scene was Derek the Collector Phillips, a known pickpocket and con artist who specialized in targeting distracted tourists at popular London attractions. Phillips was a slippery character who had been arrested multiple times but always managed to avoid serious charges. He was particularly skilled at working crowds during incidents like this one, when everyone's attention was focused on the drama unfolding rather than on their personal belongings. Morrison realized that while everyone had been watching Marcus's confrontation with the horses, Phillips had likely been busy relieving several tourists of their wallets, phones, and valuables. The detective inspector made a decision that would give Wellington and Victoria an opportunity for an even more satisfying form of revenge. Meanwhile, Marcus and his friends had settled into a corner table at a nearby cafe, nursing their wounded pride along with overpriced coffee and pastries. Marcus had removed his damaged sneaker and was examining his bruised foot, while Sarah scrolled through the social media responses to their videos. "Marcus," she said slowly, her face pale as she read comment after comment, "I think we might have a problem." The videos had indeed gone viral, but not in the way they had hoped. Instead of sympathy for Marcus's plight, the internet was celebrating the horse's behavior. Comments ranged from, "Those horses are legends," to "perfect example of why you should respect the rules." Someone had even created a meme using a screenshot of Marcus hopping on one foot with the caption, "When you mess with the Queen's horses and they mess back." Marcus snatched Sarah's phone and scrolled through the responses, his face growing redder with each comment he read. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Those animals attacked me and everyone thinks it's funny." His friend Jake, who had been unusually quiet since the incident, finally spoke up. "Dude, maybe we should just let this go. Those horses were just doing their job and you did kind of ignore all the warning signs." But Marcus was beyond reason, now. His embarrassment had transformed into anger and he was determined to get some form of revenge. "No way," he said firmly. "I'm not letting some horses make me look like a fool. We're going back there this afternoon and I'm going to show everyone that I'm not afraid of those overgrown ponies." Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Marcus, maybe Jake's right. The security guard was pretty clear about staying away from the horses. What if we get in real trouble?" Marcus waved off her concerns. "What are they going to do? Arrest me for looking at horses? I know my rights. We paid good money to come here and I'm not going to let some animals ruin our vacation." What Marcus didn't know was that Detective Inspector Morrison had been monitoring social media responses to the incident and had identified the American tourists involved. More importantly, he had developed a plan that would serve multiple purposes, giving the horses a chance to complete their lesson while also helping to catch a known criminal. That afternoon, as tourists began gathering for the evening ceremony, Morrison positioned himself with a clear view of the horse posts. He had briefed the mounted guards about the situation and received approval from his superiors for an unusual operation. Wellington and Victoria, refreshed from their midday rest and feeding, seemed to sense that something interesting was about to happen. True to his word, Marcus returned with his friends in tow, his damaged sneaker replaced with a new pair and his torn jacket switched for a fresh shirt. His determination to redeem himself was evident in his aggressive stride and the defiant set of his jaw. Sarah followed reluctantly, still filming, but clearly uncomfortable with the plan. "This time will be different," Marcus announced loudly, as they approached the horses area. "I'm going to show these horses who's boss, and everyone's going to see that Americans don't back down from anything." His voice carried across the courtyard, and Morrison smiled grimly as he saw Derek Phillips emerge from the growing crowd of tourists, drawn like a moth to flame by the promise of another distraction-filled incident. The pickpocket positioned himself strategically among a group of elderly tourists who were fumbling with their cameras, clearly preparing to take advantage of whatever chaos Marcus was about to create. Wellington and Victoria seemed to recognize their morning adversary immediately. Both horses' ears swiveled forward with interest and their postures straightened with alert attention. If horses could communicate telepathically, Morrison thought, these two would definitely be sharing battle plans. Marcus approached Wellington first, apparently having learned nothing from his morning encounters. "Round 2, big guy," he said, confidently, pulling out his phone to record what he hoped would be his triumphant comeback video. But this time, the horses had backup. Morrison had positioned several plainclothes officers throughout the crowd, all of them briefed on Phillips's identity and methods. As Marcus began his second confrontation with Wellington, the officers kept their eyes on the pickpocket, waiting for him to make his move. Wellington, as if sensing that this encounter had higher stakes than the morning's incident, decided to elevate his response. As Marcus reached toward him once again, the massive horse didn't just bite or nudge. He grabbed the young man's new shirt with his teeth and began to shake his head back and forth like a dog with a toy. Marcus found himself being gently but firmly shaken by over 1,000 pounds of highly trained horse, his feet barely touching the ground as Wellington lifted him slightly with each shake. The crowd gasped and laughed as Marcus flailed helplessly, his phone flying from his hand and clattering across the cobblestones. "Help!" Marcus squeaked, his voice higher than usual due to his awkward position. "Someone help me!" But the best was yet to come, as Victoria was about to demonstrate why she was considered the more tactically brilliant of the two horses. And Derek Phillips, focused intently on the chaos unfolding before him, was about to walk directly into a trap that had been set specifically for him. Royal Guard horses get revenge. Part 4A's. Wellington held Marcus in his gentle but firm grip, shaking him like a rag doll. The crowd's attention was completely captured by the spectacle. Phones were raised, videos were recording, and everyone was either laughing or gasping in amazement at the horse's perfectly controlled response to the persistent tourist. Marcus's legs kicked helplessly as he dangled from Wellington's powerful jaws, his new shirt stretching but not tearing thanks to the horse's careful bite pressure. This was exactly what Derek Phillips had been waiting for. The seasoned pickpocket moved smoothly through the distracted crowd, his experienced hands already reaching for the purse of an elderly Japanese woman who was completely absorbed in filming the scene. In his 15 years of working London's tourist attractions, Phillips had never seen such a perfect distraction. But he had underestimated both the intelligence of Victoria and the planning of Detective Inspector Morrison. Victoria, positioned strategically nearby, had been watching Phillips's movements with the keen attention that made her legendary among the palace staff. Horses are naturally observant animals, and Victoria had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot troublemakers in crowds. She had noticed Phillips during the morning incident, observing how he moved differently from the other tourists, his eyes scanning for opportunities rather than focusing on the entertainment. Now, as Phillips reached for his first target, Victoria made her move. With the precision of a master chess player, Victoria stepped sideways, apparently adjusting her position to get a better view of Wellington's performance. But her movement was calculated to perfection. Her massive body blocked Phillips's escape route just as his hand closed around the Japanese woman's purse. Phillips tugged at the purse, but the woman's grip was stronger than he had anticipated. As he pulled harder, trying to free his prize before anyone noticed, Victoria completed her tactical maneuver. The intelligent mare somehow managed to step on the trailing strap of Philip's own backpack, which he wore slung low for easy access during his pickpocketing activities. Suddenly, Phillips found himself in the same predicament that Marcus had experienced that morning, trapped beneath a horse's hoof, but in a much more compromising position. As he tried to move away with his stolen purse, his backpack held him in place like an anchor. The Japanese woman, feeling the unusual tug on her purse, turned to see Phillips pulling at her belongings while apparently being held in place by the Yao, beautiful bay horse. "Thief!" she cried in accented English, her voice cutting through the laughter of the crowd watching Marcus's continued predicament with Wellington. Detective Inspector Morrison smiled broadly as he saw his plan unfold perfectly. He gave a subtle hand signal to his plainclothes officers, who immediately began moving toward Phillips from multiple directions. But Victoria wasn't finished with her part of the operation. The clever mare seemed to understand exactly what was happening. As Phillips frantically tried to free himself from her hoof while still clutching the stolen purse, Victoria turned her head to look directly at him. For a moment, horse and criminal stared at each other in what could only be described as a battle of wills. Then Victoria did something that amazed even the experienced police officers watching. She opened her mouth and emitted a loud, trumpeting neigh that seemed to say, "Gotcha." The sound was so perfectly timed and so obviously directed at Phillips that even people who knew nothing about horses understood that this animal had just announced the capture of a criminal. The crowd's attention was now split between Marcus, who was still being gently shaken by Wellington, and the unfolding drama with Phillips and Victoria. Cameras swiveled to capture both scenes as people realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Phillips made one desperate attempt to escape, abandoning the purse and trying to slip out of his backpack straps. But Victoria had anticipated this move too. As he struggled to free himself, she shifted her weight just enough to pin him more firmly in place without causing injury. "This is impossible," Phillips muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he realized his situation was becoming increasingly desperate. "I'm being arrested by a horse." Detective Inspector Morrison approached with his officers, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and genuine amazement at Victoria's tactical brilliance. "Derek Phillips," he announced formally, "you're under arrest for theft. And I have to say that's the most elegant citizen's arrest I've ever witnessed." As the officers moved in to make the arrest, Victoria finally lifted her hoof, allowing Phillips to be taken into custody. The pickpocket's backpack revealed a collection of stolen items from that day and previous days: wallets, phones, jewelry, and cameras that he had lifted from distracted tourists around London's major attractions. Meanwhile, Wellington seemed to decide that Marcus had learned his lesson. The big horse gently lowered the young American back to the ground and released his shirt, which was now thoroughly stretched and damp with horse saliva, but otherwise undamaged. Marcus stumbled backward, his legs shaky and his face pale with shock. "What just happened?" Marcus gasped, looking around at the crowd of tourists who were now applauding both horses. "Did that horse just help catch a criminal?" Sarah, who had been filming the entire sequence, lowered her phone with a look of wonder. "Marcus," she said softly, "I think these horses are a lot smarter than we thought." The Japanese woman whose purse had been saved approached Victoria with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered to the horse, gently patting her neck in gratitude. Victoria accepted the thanks graciously, her ears forward and her expression gentle now that the crisis had passed. Detective Inspector Morrison addressed the crowd through a small megaphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed something extraordinary. These horses are not only trained to protect the royal family and maintain order, but as you've seen, they're also excellent at spotting trouble and helping law enforcement." He gestured toward Wellington and Victoria, who stood proudly at their posts as if they had simply been doing their normal duties. I want to remind everyone that these are working military animals deserving of respect and space. They've demonstrated today that they're more than capable of handling situations appropriately, but they shouldn't have to. Marcus, still recovering from his encounter, found himself looking at Wellington with a new perspective. The horse's dark eyes met his, and, for a moment, there was something almost like communication between them. Marcus realized that he had been completely wrong about these animals. They weren't just trained performers or living statues. They were intelligent, professional, and thoroughly capable of making their own decisions about how to handle problems. "But I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly to Wellington, his voice barely audible above the crowd noise. "I should have shown you more respect from the beginning." Wellington's ears flicked forward, and he lowered his massive head slightly in what could have been acknowledgement of the apology. Sarah captured this moment on her phone, and it would later become one of the most shared images from their viral video series, not for its humor, but for its genuine emotion. But the horse's revenge was about to reach its most spectacular conclusion, as Detective Inspector Morrison had one more surprise in store that would cement Wellington and Victoria's reputations as the most remarkable Royal Guard horses in history. Royal Guard horses get revenge. Part 5 word of the afternoon's extraordinary events traveled through official channels with remarkable speed. Within hours, the story had reached the desk of Colonel Patricia Whitmore, the commanding officer responsible for all Royal Guard operations. A career military officer with 30 years of service, Colonel Whitmore had seen many unusual incidents during her tenure, but never anything quite like this. The security footage showed everything in perfect detail: Wellington's precise handling of the disrespectful tourist, Victoria's tactical brilliance in catching a criminal, and both horses' remarkable ability to assess situations and respond appropriately without endangering anyone. More importantly, the footage revealed the intelligence and judgment that made these animals truly exceptional. "Get me a direct line to the palace press office," Colonel Whitmore told her aide after reviewing the videos for the third time, "and contact the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. I think we need to discuss a commendation ceremony." Meanwhile, Detective Inspector Morrison was fielding calls from news outlets around the world. The story of the crime-fighting horses had been picked up by international media, with headlines ranging from "Royal Horses Turn Detective" to "Four-legged police officers make perfect arrest." The videos shot by tourists were being shared millions of times across social media platforms, making Wellington and Victoria overnight celebrities. Marcus and his friends found themselves at the center of an unexpected media storm. Their hotel lobby was crowded with reporters wanting to interview the American tourist who was taught a lesson by the Queen's horses. Marcus, still processing the day's events, was struggling to understand how he had become part of a story that was being celebrated around the world. "I don't get it," he told Sarah as they sat in their hotel room, watching news coverage of their own incident on BBC World News. "Everyone's acting like those horses are heroes, but they basically attacked me." Sarah, who had been reading social media comments for hours, had gained a different perspective on what had happened. "Marcus," she said carefully, "maybe they weren't attacking you. Maybe they were trying to teach you something important." She showed him some of the comments from horse experts and military personnel who had analyzed the videos. Professional trainers pointed out the precision of the horses' responses, noting that both Wellington and Victoria had used exactly the minimum amount of force necessary to make their point, while ensuring no real harm came to anyone. Military officers praised the horses' judgment and restraint, comparing their behavior to that of highly trained human security personnel. Marcus read the comments with growing understanding. One comment from a retired Royal Guard particularly struck him. Those horses showed more patience and professionalism than many humans would have in the same situation. They gave multiple warnings, used proportional responses, and even helped catch a real criminal. "They're not just animals. They're highly trained professionals who deserve respect." 3 days later, Colonel Whitmore's unusual request had been approved at the highest levels. Buckingham Palace announced that Wellington and Victoria would receive special recognition for their exceptional service, with a ceremony to be held in the very courtyard where their famous encounters had taken place. The announcement drew hundreds of additional tourists to the palace, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous horses. Marcus and Sarah, whose flights home weren't scheduled for another 2 days, found themselves swept up in the excitement as the press learned of their involvement in the story. A reporter from the BBC approached them outside their hotel. "Mr. Thompson, how does it feel to be part of the story that's made these horses famous around the world?" Marcus paused, considering his words carefully. Over the past 3 days, he had done a lot of thinking about respect, boundaries, and the difference between confidence and arrogance. "Honestly," he said slowly, "I feel honored to have met them. I just wish I had approached the situation differently from the beginning." The reporter pressed for more details. "Do you regret your actions that day?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied without hesitation. "I was disrespectful and ignorant, and those horses handled the situation better than I did. They taught me a lesson I won't forget." Sarah squeezed his hand, proud of his growth and honesty. She had edited their original videos, adding captions that explained what they had learned from the experience and encouraging others to respect the rules and boundaries at historical sites. On the day of the ceremony, a distinguished crowd gathered in the palace courtyard. Representatives from the Metropolitan Police, the military, and the royal household were present, along with international media and carefully selected members of the public. Marcus and Sarah had been invited as special guests, a gesture that Marcus found both humbling and meaningful. Wellington and Victoria, groomed to perfection and adorned with special ceremonial bridles, stood proudly at the center of attention. Both horses seemed to understand the significance of the occasion, their posture perfect and their expressions alert, but calm. Colonel Whitmore stepped forward to address the crowd. "Today we recognize 2 extraordinary members of our Royal Guard unit," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Wellington and Victoria have demonstrated that true professionalism involves not just following orders, but making intelligent decisions in complex situations." She gestured toward the horses, who stood like living statues despite the crowd and cameras around them. Their actions 3 days ago showed remarkable judgment, restraint, and public service. They protected the dignity of their posts, ensured public safety, and even assisted in law enforcement, all while maintaining the highest standards of conduct. Detective Inspector Morrison stepped forward to present Wellington and Victoria with special recognition medallions that would be permanently attached to their ceremonial bridles. As he approached each horse, they lowered their heads graciously, as if understanding the honor being bestowed upon them. "These horses have shown us that intelligence and professionalism can take many forms," Morrison said as he fastened Victoria's medallion. "They've earned the respect and admiration of law enforcement professionals around the world." The crowd applauded as photographers captured the historic moment. Marcus watched with genuine admiration, finally understanding what he had encountered that first morning. These weren't just trained animals performing duties. They were intelligent individuals with their own dignity and judgment. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus found himself face to face with Wellington once again. This time, however, his approach was completely different. He stopped at a respectful distance and waited, making no sudden movements or demands. Wellington studied the young man who had caused such a commotion days earlier. The horse's intelligent eyes seemed to take in Marcus's changed posture, his respectful distance, and his patient waiting. After a long moment, Wellington took a single step forward and gently extended his muzzle toward Marcus, not demanding contact, but offering it. Marcus reached out slowly and carefully, allowing Wellington to sniff his hand before gently touching the horse's soft nose. It was a moment of mutual respect and understanding that photographers captured from every angle. "Thank you," Marcus whispered to Wellington. "Thank you for teaching me something I really needed to learn." Victoria, not to be outdone, approached Sarah with the same gentle dignity. The mare allowed Sarah to stroke her neck while maintaining her regal bearing, accepting the young woman's quiet apology and genuine admiration. The contrast between this interaction and their first encounter was so striking that it became the defining image of the entire story. News outlets around the world ran the photos side by side. Marcus being shaken by Wellington 3 days earlier, and Marcus respectfully greeting the same horse as an honored guest at a royal ceremony. Colonel Whitmore addressed the media one final time. "This story demonstrates something important about respect, learning, and second chances," she said. "Mr. Thompson showed the courage to acknowledge his mistakes and learn from them. Wellington and Victoria showed us that true strength includes knowing when to enforce boundaries and when to offer forgiveness." The ceremony had an unexpected epilogue when Derek Phillips, the pickpocket caught by Victoria's quick thinking, was brought out in handcuffs to face additional charges. As he was led past the horses, Victoria turned to look at him with what could only be described as satisfaction. Even in custody, Phillips couldn't help but nod respectfully to the mayor who had ended his criminal career with such style. The media coverage of the ceremony reached even larger audiences than the original incident videos. Educational institutions began using the story as a case study in conflict resolution, respect for authority, and learning from mistakes. The horses' measured responses became textbook examples of appropriate force and professional judgment. Marcus and Sarah's social media followings exploded, but now for positive reasons. Their honest documentation of learning from their mistakes and growing as people resonated with millions of viewers. They used their platform to promote respectful tourism and cultural awareness, often referencing their life-changing encounter with two very special horses. Royal Guard horses get revenge. Part 6. 1 year after the incident that made them famous worldwide, Wellington and Victoria had become more than just Royal Guard horses. They were living legends whose story continued to impact people across the globe. The Palace gift shop now sold commemorative items featuring their images, and their story had been adapted into children's books, teaching lessons about respect and understanding. Marcus Thompson graduated from university with honors. His thesis, on cultural sensitivity and international tourism, earning academic recognition and leading to a job with the State Department's Cultural Exchange Program. His transformation from an arrogant tourist to a respectful cultural ambassador was so complete that he was often invited to speak at conferences about learning from mistakes and growing through challenging experiences. Sarah had leveraged their viral fame into a successful career as a travel blogger, but with a completely different approach than her original Instagram posts. Her content now focused on responsible tourism, cultural appreciation, and the importance of respecting local customs and regulations. She had millions of followers who looked to her for guidance on how to travel thoughtfully and respectfully. Bewam. Ripple effects of Wellington and Victoria's actions extended far beyond their immediate fame. Tourism authorities around the world began implementing new programs to educate visitors about appropriate behavior at cultural and historical sites. The Wellington and Victoria Protocol became shorthand for clear boundary setting combined with proportional enforcement. Derek Phillips, the pickpocket caught by Victoria's quick thinking, had served his sentence and emerged from prison a changed man. The humiliation of being apprehended by a horse had initially angered him, but during his incarceration, he had time to reflect on the intelligence and precision of Victoria's actions. He began working with a prison animal therapy program and discovered a genuine talent for training and caring for horses. Upon his release, Phillips applied for and received a position as a stable hand at a rehabilitation center that used horses to help former criminals reintegrate into society. His unique experience of being arrested by a horse gave him credibility with the program participants and helped him develop innovative training techniques that combined respect for the animals with practical life skills. Detective Inspector. Morrison had received a commendation for his creative law enforcement strategy and had been promoted to chief inspector. He often spoke at police training seminars about thinking outside traditional approaches to crime prevention and the importance of recognizing unexpected allies in law enforcement. The horses themselves continued their regular duties with distinction, but their legend had grown to almost mythical proportions. Tourists came from around the world specifically hoping to see Wellington and Victoria, and both horses seemed to enjoy their celebrity status while maintaining their professional dignity. Colonel Lunn. Whitmore had documented their story in a comprehensive report that became required reading at military academies worldwide. The case study examined how individual initiative, intelligent decision-making, and appropriate response to provocation could serve multiple objectives simultaneously: maintaining order, educating the public, and protecting institutional dignity. The Japanese woman whose purse Victoria had helped save, Mrs. Tanaka, had become an unofficial ambassador for the horse's story in Japan. She organized annual trips to London for groups of Japanese tourists, all of whom came specifically to pay their respects to Wellington and Victoria. Mrs. Tanaka always brought apples and carrots as gifts, which the horses accepted graciously, as their due. Educational institutions incorporated the story into curricula, ranging from animal behavior studies to conflict resolution programs. Psychology professors used the incident to demonstrate how clear communication of boundaries, combined with consistent and proportional enforcement, could modify behavior effectively without causing lasting harm. The story had even influenced policy changes at tourist attractions globally. Many sites implemented Wellington and Victoria standards, clear signage, well-trained staff, and protocols for dealing with disrespectful visitors that emphasized education over punishment while maintaining firm boundaries. Marcus's younger sister had been so inspired by his transformation that she changed her own college major to veterinary science, specializing in equine behavior. She wrote her senior thesis on the intelligence and emotional capacity of horses, using Wellington and Victoria's story as a central example of equine problem-solving abilities. The horses' original mounted guards, who had remained professionally silent throughout the famous incidents, were eventually interviewed for a documentary about the events. They revealed that both Wellington and Victoria had shown signs of planning their responses, subtle shifts in posture and attention that suggested the horses were analyzing the situations and formulating strategies. Wellington knew exactly what he was doing that first morning, explained Sergeant Davies, who had been mounted on the big gelding during the initial encounter. I felt him gathering himself, assessing the situation. When he acted, it was with complete precision and control. He wasn't angry or reactive, and he was professional. Victoria's rider, Corporal Stevens, shared similar observations. Victoria has always been the tactical thinker of the pair. The way she positioned herself to trap that pickpocket was like watching a chess master make a winning move. She saw several moves ahead and executed her plan perfectly. The documentary, titled The Horses Who Fought Back, won several international awards and was translated into dozens of languages. It featured interviews with animal behaviorists, military experts, law enforcement officials, and the key human participants in the story. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a leading expert in equine intelligence, provided scientific context for the horse's behavior. What Wellington and Victoria demonstrated was advanced problem-solving, emotional regulation, and social intelligence, she explained in the documentary. They assessed complex social situations, determined appropriate responses, and executed those responses with remarkable precision. This level of cognitive function places them among the most intelligent horses ever documented. The horse's story also sparked renewed interest in the breeding and training programs that produced such exceptional animals. Researchers studied their lineages, training methods, and environmental factors that might have contributed to their remarkable abilities. This research led to improvements in training programs for working horses in various fields, from police work to therapy animals. Wellington and Victoria, now in their prime years, continued to serve with distinction while graciously accepting their roles as ambassadors for their species. They had become symbols of intelligence, dignity, and appropriate response to provocation, qualities that resonated with people far beyond the world of horses and royal guards. Their legacy was enshrined not just in the commemorative medallions they wore, but in the countless lives they had touched and changed. From a disrespectful tourist who became a cultural ambassador, to a career criminal who found redemption through working with horses, to millions of people worldwide who learned to approach cultural differences with greater respect and understanding. The revenge of the Royal Guard horses had evolved into something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. What began as two intelligent animals defending their dignity had become a global lesson in respect, growth, and the remarkable capacity for understanding that exists between humans and animals when approached with the right attitude. Wellington and Victoria had proven that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is teaching others to become better versions of themselves. Their story would continue to inspire and educate people for generations to come, ensuring that their legacy extended far beyond their years of active service. In the end, they had achieved the perfect revenge, not through cruelty or humiliation, but through demonstrating such intelligence, dignity, and precision that they had earned the respect and admiration of the entire world. They had turned a moment of disrespect into a lifetime of honor, and in doing so, had shown that true strength lies not in domination, but in the wisdom to respond appropriately to every situation. Their story became a timeless reminder that respect must be earned through actions, that intelligence comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest teachers are found in the most unexpected places. Wellington and Victoria had not just gotten their revenge, they had transformed it into something beautiful, meaningful, and lasting.